Questions of Doom.
Hello and welcome back to another Questions of Doom. In this series, as ever, I attempt to answer questions that you send my way using the archaeosoup@gmail.com email address, as displayed on the YouTube channel homepage, but as you'll also see at the end of this video. In answering these questions by video, it is my fond hope that the answer is not only made useful to the person who has asked the question, but also anyone else out there who may be wondering the same thing. Now, today's question, as ever, is a very interesting one. More often than not, these are things which I would never think, really, to ask off my own back. So thank you so much to those of you who do send in these questions. Today's question goes like this. Dear Mr. Soup, what is the most important skill we should take from the Stone Ages? That is, from the Paleolithic, Mesolithic and Neolithic. If you could, which would you add to the school curriculum and why? Cool indie statue, by the way. Karl Marx 97, not Karl Marx, Karl Marx 97. Well, Carl, you ask a very interesting and important question, and also you noticed the indie statue. Yeah, it is pretty cool. But yeah, it's a very interesting and important question. First of all, I suppose highlighting the Stone Ages, highlighting prehistory, is a really important thing, especially in schools, because not many people seem to know just how much of our history is made up of it. Something like 96% of human history it was stone tool based technology. Almost everything we've ever done has been based on stone tools. So I find that, yeah, very important to highlight that. So first of all, good thinking. But then I put this question out actually on the Archaeology Facebook page last week, and people came up with some of their responses. One person said, someone called Alan said, Paleolithic and Mesolithic, what he would take from that is living with the surrounding environment in a sustainable way. He also said from the Neolithic, brain surgery using flint, drill and blade tools with no drugs, or at least drugs that we can detect. So, and also surviving that, so trepanation, drilling into the head and surviving. Yeah, that's certainly a skill that you could, well, it's an important skill. I'm not sure you can put that in the national curriculum though. And again, I don't think I mentioned the national curriculum when I put this on Facebook. Someone called Sabina said how to barbecue. Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough, how to barbecue. And I imagine some people could benefit from those lessons, certainly if you go by usual barbecuing standards, especially in the UK. And then someone called Al said baby wearing. Now, I presume that they're referring to the act of strapping a baby and sort of holding it as you walk along. They may not be referring to that, but again, that could be an interesting and important skill. But I'm not sure it's a number one skill, but if I only had one thing I could do, I would pick. Now, there are many things throughout, I mean, we're talking about a huge space of time, but there are many things throughout there which could be really interesting actually to include in a national curriculum, or just to talk about a bit. So I suppose I'd start with, recently, there have been the finding of essentially a paint factory in South Africa dating to around about 100,000 years ago. This was actually highlighted in an Archaeoscoop the day after it was announced. And basically people making paint, the artwork essentially, and how that seems to accompany human beings. Art and human beings go hand in hand. There are other really interesting examples of this throughout the eons of time. So around about 30,000 years ago, there's a really fascinating man's body with a lion's head in the Hohlenstein-stadel cave in South Germany. As I say, from about 30,000 years ago, and that's just one example. It's this sort of portable, transportable art. Really interesting stuff. But then again, art is already on the national curriculum. So I suppose, and I know for a fact that art teachers touch on prehistoric art. So maybe we don't have to think about including that. It already is sort of there. But maybe a bit more detail would be good. There's some really interesting stuff out there. There's a really interesting deer on a staff, which is it's actually doing a little poo, and on the poo there's a little bird. Yeah, that's one to look up. It's really, but yeah. So maybe a bit more detail on that. But that's not the one thing I would change. You could talk about actually inherited hierarchies and how they developed at this time. or rather through these times, and whether or not actually inherited hierarchies are inherent to human nature. That would be really an interesting thing to explore in national curriculums. You could actually tackle issues like bullying, the relationship between teachers and pupils, why it is that you should respect your teacher, or indeed your parents, and also the nature of inheriting power. Really interesting examples of this, for example, come from Sungir, a really famous actually burial with lots of beads. This person clearly had lots of power, beads and shells, sorry, which were coming from great distances. That's about 25,000 years ago. There's the Grotte des Enfants in northwest Italy. I probably butchered that, but the cave of the children, or the infants, showing that young people, small people, children had inherited some form of status because they're buried with a ton of really rather exotic goods. That's about 20,000 years ago. And I think there's also one called El Princeps in Italy as well, from about the same time. Again, a guy who's got a huge amount of power. And you could talk about that and how it relates to our society, human nature, politics. That could be really interesting. But also, you could also possibly say it's a negative thing. It depends on what end of the spectrum probably you're on. There's also as well tool making. I would highlight, probably, if I could, tool making, because the hierarchies, they're sort of touched on in other ways, history, so sort of sociology, this kind of thing. That this all hinted at in other parts of the curriculum. So maybe tool making. I'd really possibly want to highlight just how good people were and still are at making stone tools, or rather still can be. There's the Solutrean industry, really, really good. Fairly advanced flintstone tools from about 22 to 17,000 years ago. Really impressive stuff. So finely made stone tools. Yeah, that could be interesting. And also actually maybe explore the relationship between tools and the environment. So point out that just because a stone tool looks big and clunky, it is a response to the environment. You need that particular shape to get the animal that you're hunting, and then track maybe the response to environment through stone tools as time goes on. That could be really interesting. Now, there's also other instances of bizarre things which you could include in the curriculum. So maybe not just talking about stone tools because they're a bit boring. Maybe you could talk about other forms of technology. For example, there's the Mesoic mammoth bone hut, which I've certainly done an in focus video about. That was found in the Ukraine, dates to around about 25 to 30,000 years ago, I do believe. Or is it earlier than that? Anyway, well, it's old, it's Paleolithic. Yeah, that could be worth pointing out. The alternative ways that people use animal remains, I suppose, or alternative ways to make use of them. Because yes, they've eaten the mammoth, they hunted the mammoth, but also they've used the bones to construct the house. Perhaps that could be an element of this sustainable living, which Alan pointed out at the top of the sheet here. Well, that might be worthwhile including. There's also other things, for example, bow making. That could be highlighted. Bows come into our repertoire, certainly by the Mesolithic. There's something called the Holmgard bow, which is probably wasn't the best bow in the world, but it certainly highlights how bows were being made. There are lots of things which haven't survived all that well for the most part in terms of evidence, but you have technologies like nets. Is it Frisac or Frisac netting? It's a Mesolithic site, but it's netting made out of plant fibres. Or wicker cages. Is it Agorod or Agorod 5 in Sweden? All this non-stone tool technology, this less durable stuff, including, for example, the mammoth bone hut at Mesoic. That could be worth highlighting as part of a spectrum of sustainable living using resources that grow back again. I suppose, because that sort of stuff is touched on in other areas as well. Geography, often they look at environment and sustainable living and alternative ways of living. There are other parts of the curriculum that tackle that. I think possibly for me, the one thing I would include from the Paleolithic, Mesolithic and Neolithic, and the ones in between and around, all the different stone ages and stone tools and stone cultures, probably would be sewing. Now I know home economics is a concept that already exists in schools, in classrooms. But I would point out just how sewing technology is so crucial to human beings. That's probably the one thing that I would do, actually. There you go, sewing, yes. Because, well, for example, we have some of the earliest bone needles found around about 61,000 before, or BP, so 61,000 years ago, in the Sibundu cave in South Africa. So that's quite old, sewing technology. But also, actually, just point out how clothes making has given us the ability to go beyond our natural environment, as it were. One of my favourite lecturers, who I recorded an interview with a wee while ago, sadly the sound didn't keep, but we're going to re-record in September. He once wrote that travelling into Northern Europe is an absurd thing for a tropical ape to do, and it was only possible because of the cultural buffers that we have created for ourselves, and that includes clothing. We're able to go into cold and wet environments because we make clothes. So you've got, for example, ivory needles about 30,000 years ago in the Kostensky site in Russia. Again, Paleolithic, but sewing technology. As soon as you start to see art and tools, you also see sewing often in these sites. Residues of animal skin, trousers, shirts and shoes found in Cro-Magnon caves near Moscow. Magdalenian sewing needles. That's Magdalenian is another Stone Age culture or identifiable sort of tool set found in the Goran cave in France. Goran, and also fibre weaving, knitting, twisting of fibres. Flax fibres, for example, have been found in Georgia. I have to check this one. Zudzuana cave. About 34,000 years ago. So fibres, clothes, skin processing and sewing, so crucial to human life, and actually crucial today. The number of people who have clothes today which get a hole in them and they just throw them away. That may well actually help to tackle this sustainable living idea as well. Yeah, there you go, sewing. That's what I'd include, sewing. I'd put sewing into the national curriculum. I'd highlight how it's a key human skill, how human beings, when they arrive somewhere, they bring sewing needles with them, and how if we all could sew a bit more, maybe we'd be a little less throwaway-ish. Yeah, sewing. So there you go, Karl Marx 97. That's my addition to the national curriculum from the Paleolithic, Mesolithic and Neolithic. Sewing. But you weren't expecting that one. Now I'm sure some of you out there will have other ideas about this, so please do feel free to comment below. I'm sure Carl would love to read your suggestions. And yeah, just have a think. It's a really interesting concept, this. I mean, and I'm not remotely saying that my answer is the answer. Lots of really good ideas have already been suggested on Facebook. But yeah, sewing. Simple, easy to implement, but crucial to humanity. And if we all could sew a bit more, well, maybe there might be a few less sweatshops around the world as well. Who knows? Sewing. So there you go. Yes, please do comment below. And I'm off to help a friend set up a school workshop for chopping wood and making metal things and vacuum forming, and maybe even a blacksmithery, forge. Yes. Until next time, have a great time thinking about this. Do take care. Bye bye.